Broadcasting live from the IRSMedic studios, it's Parental Advisory. And today on Parental Advisory, we have a very important topic to discuss. H.R. 22 has passed both the House and Senate. It's expected to pass and be signed into law, adding new Section 7345 to the tax code. The title is probably the most important part: a revocation or denial of passport in case of certain tax delinquencies. Exactly how it's going to be implemented is not clear yet. We don't have all the details since it hasn't been signed. It's almost definitely signed. So as we get updates, we'll let you know.
It is basically a done deal at this point. Mm-hmm. So we are acting as it is going to be it is the law. And then, of course, there's going to be some regulations on that. But before we go any further, Claudine, I just got to, I've been seeing a lot of this going on, a lot of chatter around the internet about this. And I don't think people understand what they're saying. And there's a lot of professionals out there writing articles, and a lot of people writing articles about the IRS revoking passports. Yes, it's going to happen. But what's going on is people are getting freaked out. Mm-hmm. I mean, freaked out. Tax problems happen all the time to regular people. Okay, it is so easy to get yourself into a tax problem. You have 1 year where you see a tax bill that doesn't make sense, and it's something you're not sure of, and your response is to not file your tax return, or file it and then just pretend it doesn't exist and not do anything. But then the problem's not corrected, and so you could see how a problem gets big quickly. Or you're missing records. There was an audit, you never fought it, you're missing records to fight it, and you just sort of go into a ball. And this is what's going to happen with this whole sort of passport thing. So people listening is like, I just want to let you know, no matter what is going on in your life, no matter how bad you feel about having a tax problem, you're not alone. I've talked to many people who were contemplating suicide.
Wow. And
they said, well, I was thinking of killing myself, but let me just try giving a call to this attorney instead. Okay? Yeah. And it was a much better call. It's like, yeah, you know why? Because that's suicide. Actually, we can't help you with the tax problem.
Right.
But by calling and taking action, we can.
Yep.
And so there's absolutely a way out of every problem. That's what people need to know, is just don't. Yep, it's scary. It's going to happen, but you can take action and make it go away.
Definitely. And we'll get into more details on that. The first thing I want to touch on is the three most important points about passport revocation. Then we'll get into detailed aspects about the bill and collections and all that good stuff. So here's what we know. Under the bill, the IRS must submit certifications of, quote, seriously delinquent taxpayers to the Secretary of the Treasury, who must then pass along these certifications to the Secretary of State, who's required to deny such person a passport if the person applies. They are also permitted to revoke a passport that's already been issued to a person certified as a seriously delinquent taxpayer. So what's your first question?
My first question is, what's a seriously delinquent taxpayer? But also consider yourself being one of these people who may or may not be seriously delinquent. I mean, that's a hell of a thing someone's saying about you. Mm-hmm. That's a hell of a thing to be saying about an individual.
Yep.
We've talked about the income tax, about basically how it's kind of, the moral high ground might not be exactly there to implement it the way it is, okay? But regardless of that, no one has a problem just throwing this word around, seriously delinquent taxpayer, because this is the thing. The people who are seriously delinquent taxpayers, they're not psychopaths. Mm-hmm. They're not. They have feelings. They have actual feelings. They're real people. And when someone calls them a seriously delinquent taxpayer, it freaking hurts. And it makes them just like, oh my God, I am such a screw up. I am such a screw up. That does not make someone say, oh, I'm such a screw up. Let me go fix this problem.
Right. And one thing we're going to talk about after we get through these facts is the question of, well, why don't you just pay your taxes? Which sort of irritated me. But all right, so let's now explain what a seriously delinquent taxpayer is. They're saying it's a person who owes more than $50,000 in federal taxes. That includes penalty and interest, which we know can grow so quickly. They've already have a federal tax lien filed against them, or have received a final notice of intent to levy, and the period to file an appeal on the notice has passed. So that's the actual definition. So if a person has a tax debt above this threshold amount, the IRS will not send out the certification on them if they're, one, in an active installment agreement, have an accepted offer and compromise that's in good standing, have a collection due process hearing pending, such as if they requested one after a federal tax lien was filed or a final notice of intent to levy was issued, or if the person has requested innocent spouse relief and the request is pending. So those are some of the reasons why, even if you owe over $50,000, they would not consider you seriously delinquent.
Right, and something to add in there, and that one of the things that's not in there is there's the currently non-collectible program, and I've mentioned that before a few days, and that's the one that there's some resolution scam outfits that say you may qualify for the CNC program.
Yes.
You'll never have to pay the IRS again. If you look at the law, it does not appear that being marked currently non-collectible status will stop the IRS from being able to revoke or deny your passport. Now, before people get all like, "Oh my God, what am I going to do?" Well, here's the thing: if you're in currently non-collectible status, this might be a great time to go for an offer and compromise. Also, there is the alternative of getting into a partial payment installment agreement where you're paying the IRS something nominally each month. So don't necessarily, there is I think that's a nasty little surprise they put in there. I was surprised by that. I would have thought that, hey, currently not collectible, we looked at your assets, you don't have the ability to pay. When you get the ability to pay, hey, give it to us. To me, that would say, hey, you're trying to work with the IRS. You told them what was going on.
Right.
I would have thought that would have been in there. And in the way the IRS can write the regulations, they could actually put that in there if they want to.
Yep.
So we'll see what happens with that.
Now, this we want to clarify as well. Since this has not passed yet, we don't know all the details. We want to clarify that when we read the committee report, we read it to state that if an offer or installment agreement was pending, the tax debt would not cause a person to fall within the class of seriously delinquent taxpayers. However, the bill states that a person will not be certified as a seriously delinquent taxpayer if the debt is, quote, being paid in a timely manner pursuant to an agreement to which the individual is a party under Section 6159 or 7122. This could be taken to read that a debt could cause someone to be classified as a seriously delinquent taxpayer while they have an IA or OIC pending. Now, it's our position that this could also mean a pending request or at least to offers, because under the TIPRA, the taxpayer is required to make timely payments while their offer is being considered, but that does not mean that's how the IRS will interpret the wording. And I know that was a lot of information, but again, it's how is the IRS going to interpret this?
And I think, the IRS, this law, I don't think they understand what it's going to do to the IRS. That you have an IRS that can't quite implement the Obamacare. They can't quite implement FATCA. They're short-staffed all around. They can't even collect what's owed right now because if they send out collection notices, that means people will call. They don't have the ability. They don't have the staff to handle those calls, so this is just going to create more of a nightmare because more people are going to be calling, more people are going to be freaking out. So my guess, my feeling is when they're drafting their regulations and creating their forms, they're probably going to make them a little bit more favorable to the taxpayer than as written, because they're going to say this is impossible. My guess is they're going to say, currently non-collectible does count. Your offer's pending, it counts, because there's no way they'll be able to handle all the work required of, we revoked your passport. And the IRS has a way of putting people on hold for 2 hours, right?
And then hanging up on you.
And then the problem is that the State Department doesn't quite have that ability, because, and I think it's in here somewhere, there's a humanitarian reason exception, right?
Yep.
Right. So maybe we'll talk about that later, but you could see kind of how is this really going to work out. So you revoke someone's passport and they're in Italy and they can't travel back to the United States because their grandmother died. Okay. And they go to the State Department to say, hey, I want to get this on humanitarian reasons. My grandmother died.
Yes, they've got humanitarian or emergency reasons.
Right. It's not an emergency, I guess, but it's humanitarian.
Yep.
And now you're saying, and then so the State Department said, well, if it was your mother or father, we'd let you go, but grandmother's a little bit too much of a stretch. And then you say, well, but my grandmother was the one who raised me. She was basically like my mother. oh boy. And then you're just saying, look, I'm staying here until you give it. Okay. And then they're going to grudgingly give it. So, I mean, that's sort of the unintended consequence. You're dumping a whole bunch of work on the State Department. And I mean, that is this, wow. Oh my God, I just realized how horrible it's going to be at the State Department. At all these countries, like, I have I mean, and there's a tremendous amount of people who owe taxes. It's, what's it, 10 million people? Something like that. The total amount owed to the IRS is $500 billion. That's the accounts receivable. Yeah,
wow.
Yeah, that's the total amount that the IRS is owed is $500 billion. So it's just an incredible amount of people who owe the IRS money, and they just, they never had a realistic way to pay it off. It got out of control. Yeah. Very quickly.
Yep. So I'd love to see the clarification on emergency or humanitarian reasons, what exactly that entails. What I also want to talk about, Anthony, you mentioned all the articles on the internet really putting a sense of fear into people. And I saw a couple examples of this, and it really irritated me. Titles like passports required for domestic travel in 2016, but the IRS can take your passport away. And now people are like, what? Domestic travel? Hold on. And I want to clarify that for people who may have seen the same headlines. So there's something called the Real ID Act created. They wanted to make a national standard for state IDs that are being issued. So a few states haven't complied yet: Minnesota, Louisiana, New Hampshire, and New York. So potentially those are the only 4 states you may need passports to travel in. But asterisk, New York, Louisiana, and New Hampshire have all got waivers until at least October 2016. So it's only potentially going to affect Minnesota. At this point, there's a possibility you may need a passport to travel outside of if you're a Minnesota resident. So, these headlines screaming passports required for domestic travel, and yet they're going to take it away. It's really not going to affect that many people.
And I have just a few comments on that, because I did see when I went to get my license renewed in September in Connecticut, I saw that they had the Real ID thing up, and I could go and get my license, get the Real ID if I showed up with my passport, and a few other things to get the Real ID. I was like, oh, geez, and I was on my way there. I'm like, oh, I left my passport back there. I'm like, all right, whatever. I don't really need it. I have a passport. But when I read the thing, it says, oh, a Real ID may be required for travel in the future. That's what it said. It didn't say was going to be. It said a Real ID may be required in the future. So I don't even know if it's an actual requirement for TSA. And when I was coming back from Tampa, I couldn't find my license. I'm like, oh my God, how am I gonna get on the plane? I don't know where I put it. I found it later. It was somewhere in my baggage, but I was like, oh my God, I'm sort of stuck in Tampa here. And I'm looking at my wallet. I'm like, well, I have my Connecticut pistol permit, and it actually worked before in LaGuardia 5 years ago.
Yeah,
so
that's actual ID.
Right. So I walked up all sheepishly. I'm like, hey man, is this going to work again? And I showed the guy. He's like, yeah, I don't care.
Yeah.
It's a state issued ID.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I used it to get into bars down south. I thought
right,
it'd be
then
cool
they know,
if I
like,
showed
hey,
up.
just
Don't mess with that. See that blonde over there?
The pistol permit really helpful.
Don't ask her to dance.
I just don't know. I mean, can you imagine TSA?
Oh.
Right? I mean, again, these requirements on the agency that has to enforce that, like, oh, you don't have the Real ID. But this is a Real ID.
Yeah.
It's not the Real ID.
Imagine the sort of how you were feeling being stuck potentially in Tampa without a driver's license. Imagine being in Germany without a passport.
And I think that's the same feeling. Like, oh my God, I'm stuck here. What am I going to do? Right,
a little bit. Oh,
a little bit worse. Right, a little bit. I guess I could get a train or something from Tampa somehow. But right, being in Germany, I mean, there's that feeling of. And I'm just thinking like, okay, and you're stuck there because you have unpaid taxes. Well, you don't have the ability to pay the taxes, right? You're like, well, I would have paid them if I had the money. I don't have the money, so I'm stuck. And there's this, the bias. You're never aware of the bias you have. That's how bias works. And when you work at the IRS, when you work in the tax resolution industry, you assume everybody knows, like, oh, as long as you get into a payment plan, that's just as good as paying back the IRS as far as they're concerned. The public at large doesn't know that. They're reading this to say, I'm a seriously delinquent taxpayer and I owe $70,000. I don't have it. I'm screwed. There's nothing I could do.
Right.
And that's not the truth. You can. There are things you can do. And so all these people passing this law along don't know the perception of regular people. They don't know that they're freaking out like, oh my God, they're going to put me in jail. Okay? The amount of people who think they're going to go to jail for their tax debts is staggering. And the IRS like, no, we would never think of putting you in jail. Okay, but you do put people in jail. Yeah, but that's when they're evading taxes. Okay, so what's the difference between evading and non-payment? Well, evasion requires a specific intent to defraud the United States Treasury. Okay, so what are you talking about? And I mean, it's a very technical, that's a difference. Like in one case, you wanted to rip off the government. In the other case, like I wasn't trying to, it just happened.
Right.
Right?
Exactly.
How is a regular person supposed to understand that legal distinction? And then, well, what does the IRS think? Maybe they, because there's a lot of tax evasion cases that were not intentional, but the IRS is, oh yeah, this is the guy.
And if you go to irs.gov, that doesn't help to make you understand the tax code much.
I know it's a very popular website, but right, it doesn't help at all. There's a lot of smiling faces, and that's just sort of, disjointed when you're told this thing, you're trapped, you're a seriously delinquent taxpayer.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Really. Wow, you're a really bad person.
Yep.
And we know you are, and you're made to feel this small, and then you go to this happy website. Here's someone get the answers you need at irs.gov.
All right, so we are talking about getting your passports possibly revoked for being seriously delinquent. We know approximately 8 million citizens are living abroad, and for them, their passport is not just to fly. They needed to open bank accounts to register their kids for school, to get a hotel room. It's also a big deal. The IRS takes us serious because we are serious.
We've earned our reputation, and we will protect our reputation.
The IRS knows exactly who we are.
We're full-time advocates, not part-time middlemen.
We are creative problem solvers, not dull form fillers.
We're lawyers, the others, they're not.
IRSMedic, the law offices of Parent, and Wynn, LLP, real tax attorneys for tough tax problems. Another thing I've been seeing in articles that sort of rubbed me the wrong way is, some of the comments people were making on these articles talking about the potential law is, well, why don't you just pay your taxes? Yeah, they should take your passport. What? Dude, just pay your taxes. What's the problem? It's not necessarily that easy.
Yeah, and those are just, those are people who are just incredibly ignorant, and that's an opportunity they missed to shut up. That was, I think, a prime minister of president of France who said that one time. But yeah, exactly. Take this opportunity to shut up because you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay, getting a tax problem is one of the easiest things in the world to do if you make money. There are traps all over the place. Let's talk about your CPA or tax professional who didn't know what the hell they were doing and got you and then didn't file your taxes right. Let's talk about the IRS who sends you notices that you might not understand. Let's talk about an examiner, an auditor who might break the law and assess you something you actually don't owe. Let's talk about that tax resolution company you hired to help you with your problem because you swore you didn't owe the money, but instead of actually helping you with they just filled out forms and had you go down the wrong road for 3 years. And it wasn't until 5 years down the road you hired someone who actually knew what they were doing to say, wait a second, this is your fix to it. You actually don't owe this money. So a lot of these times these bills are phony. They're not even real. And then you're talking about the IRS, the income tax, which is based on the income you get in 1 year. Okay. And this concept, the people who make a lot of money in 1 year, you know what? That might have been their good year, their entire life. Maybe they have 3 good years their entire life. It was a fluke. They got into money. Oh my God. But guess what? A lot of people knew they got money. And let me tell you what happens when you get money. People know. And they sniff you out. They sniff you out, and all the people come out of the woodwork. All these people are going to sell you, oh, here's the thing that you need. Oh, you need to do this. Oh, you're a big time now. Let me help you with your business. And they're all there, selling you down the road, going the wrong way. And so you haven't paid your taxes, and all your money's gone. That's how it works. It's so easy to get a tax problem. It's ridiculous.
It is. And never mind, people living in the U.S. If you're living abroad, I guess it's a pretty well-known fact that it's very difficult to get tax notices from the IRS overseas. So a lot of people living overseas don't get the actual notice that there's a lien or levy or any issue whatsoever. The Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration, our buddy, they did a report and they said the IRS data systems aren't designed to accommodate the different styles of international addresses, which can cause notices to be undeliverable. Their forwarding addresses may not work as well. So the IRS has a system so outdated that you can't put different countries, country codes. What if there is no town or state?
Right.
You can't even fill it out. The IRS can't send mail correctly overseas. So they may not even know that they have an issue. Oh, I'm getting fired up.
Yeah. So I mean, how do we even? We've talked about before about how parochial the IRS is. The IRS assumes everything is U.S. and puts everything in relation to the U.S. There's the U.S. and then there's foreign. Mm-hmm. There's U.S. addresses and then there's all those weird things with those things.
What's a postal code?
What's that? Ah, jeez. What's that? And there's so many times where people will come in. The IRS will send a notice to say there's the automatic underreporting notices. They match up 1099s, W-2s. You can get a 1099, or the IRS will send you a notice to say CP 2000 to say, hey, you didn't report all your income, and a lot of times it could be on stock sales. You did. You just lost money on your stock sale. Mm-hmm. So there's no income. But in a case like that, you actually don't have anything due, but the IRS assumes you did because they didn't know. So somebody could be getting a tax bill for something they don't owe. And, we sent you all the notices and we gave you the right. Yeah, but I never got them. I was overseas and it's so easy.
And if you're overseas, we all know that, we know that the tax code is one of the most confusing things ever. Add to it tax treaties, which are the second most confusing thing ever. And if you're living overseas, you may not know that you just made an error and then you're not getting these. So I think the majority of people, and this may be naive to say, but I would guess the majority of people that owe taxes did not do it intentionally or may not even know they have a tax problem or have fear.
It's always after the fact. No one, how many people wake up in the morning like, man, I can't wait to get into tax debt today. My day is not going to be complete if I can't just get some big bill with the IRS. Because you know what I want to do? I want to deal with them for a really long time. Yeah. Looking forward to that. Yeah, and this does not happen. If you make income, you could have an income tax problem.
Yep.
And the more you make, the more you have that fluctuation. If you have that spike in income, it's just the way it works. A lot of people come out of the woodwork and just completely abuse you and will leave you high and dry. And then once the money's gone, there you are. Like, what happened?
Yep.
Well, there's the IRS. Oh, you make a lot of money.
Hello.
You give it. Oh, and right. And when you're living overseas, you're an expat, your address is probably changing a bit. You had your address here. Oh, that was your first year working there. You were here. Okay, you and your spouse were looking for a place to live. Oh, we found one over here, and so you moved over there. And now, you know what? You actually want now we want you to work in a different branch. So now you go to a completely different country.
Yep. And you know what I read in just a couple places, I haven't been able to verify it, a couple people saying that United States Postal Service also has some outdated software where if you do move overseas and you want to have a new forwarding address, some international addresses don't work. So the United States Postal Service can't even forward it to you correctly. So that could be an issue as well.
Am I supposed to be surprised?
So you brought up a good point. What if the IRS does make a mistake? You had mentioned that. What if they screw up on their end?
Yeah.
So they have a little something in the bill. The IRS will be allowed to decertify. It sounds so scary.
Right.
Decertify a person as being a seriously delinquent taxpayer if the IRS made the certification in error. Number one, good luck getting the IRS to admit they made a mistake. And if you do get them to admit it, it's going to take a little while to go through the process.
Right. Just, as long as you have the wherewithal, as long as you're the most patient and fastidious person in the world, you could probably do it on your own, or you're just going to have to spend a lot of money for a tax attorney. Mm-hmm. And then the statement, decertify a person.
Yes. This decertification must be sent within 30 days of the event occurring, and upon receipt of the decertification, the Secretary of State is required to delete the person's name from its records of seriously delinquent taxpayers.
It all sounds bad.
It really
I mean,
does.
I guess it's better to be decertified as a person.
Then
It just sounds worse because I'm like, well, I think I'd rather be seriously delinquent than not a person. At least that way I'm a person. Now this way I'm no longer anything. I mean, this is just,
decertification, it sounds like the Matrix.
And
Like I feel
it's
like
like-
we're living in the Matrix.
I mean, this is just sort of how you are treating people like criminals. These are the best. I mean, these, the clients that we have are the best people in the world who wouldn't hurt a fly, who care about things. And they're just being slandered around, and they're being treated like trash. And that's what really bugs me. And then I guess what bugs me is, they start believing it. They start believing it. Yeah, I guess I am. Yeah, I'm just a screw up. Oh, man, I'm just a really bad person. Hey, man. Let me tell you something.
No, you're not.
No, you're not. What's really bad is the income tax.
Yeah.
It's just terrible.
But wait, Anthony. The conference agreement also adds a provision allowing a person to seek an injunction against the revocation of their passport if they're wrongly certified as being a delinquent taxpayer. Really?
Yeah.
Who's going to do that? What are you going to sue the government?
Right.
I'd love to, but like you're going to win.
Right. It's like, okay, so you have standing to sue the federal government if they wrong you.
And that's going to
Wow, I guess we need a law for that. Right. You already do. But here's the problem for that. You don't have the money to, and you don't have the time.
No.
Because it's going to take you 10 years to get justice and probably, and just beyond, just money. Look, you can pay your taxes.
Yes.
I mean, that's basically it. I mean, what a useless piece of crap law. I mean, this is really a piece of crap law, written by people in a bubble who don't understand how reality works. These are all people, and I mean, they're all, they've worked for, these politicians usually worked for a government. So all their stuff's taken care of. They don't have to worry about a tax problem. Someone else took care of it, or they've been an employee of some institution. They never see how things really happen to people, how it happens to people. They're just happy to throw around. And this is the whole idea behind this too, is part of now it's called the FAST Act, not the Drive Act, right? The FAST Act.
Yeah, it was hidden on a highway transportation bill.
This is, this is allegedly going to increase the revenues into the United States Treasury to pay for a part of the highway funding. Now, when it doesn't, when it's demonstrated that it didn't, all it did was create a mess. It created an administrative mess for the State Department, for the IRS, for the Department of Homeland Security. Who knows? Okay, is anyone going to ever be like, hey, you said this was going to save this amount of money? It didn't. Do you want to make us whole now?
Yeah.
There's never.
Like all the money they were supposed to get from offshore accounts that they didn't.
Yeah. What
Where's
about that
press release?
You guys got that $8 billion, and then we talked earlier this week about the probably billions of dollars each year they're missing from failing to tax non-U.S. people on their inheritances in the U.S.
Yeah.
They care more about them than it seems that way.
Right.
You really get that impression, like, geez, it's great to, the U.S. is great to you as long as you're not a U.S. person. Well, actually, the U.S. that's not necessarily true either. No, the U.S. is just terrible. It's the country with all the power and none of the brains.
Yep.
It needs like 200% more brains and maybe 25% the power.
Yeah.
Because right now it's just this big robot.
It's like
with
a big
little
muscly blonde
going around with a gun. I know, yeah.
Now, you do have some hope and some input to give, but before that, I want to talk about one last screwy part of this. They're going to have private debt collection of federal taxes because that's worked so well so far. Okay. So Congress is going to try it again because they're like,
right,
it's
said
failed
again.
a couple times.
Right. And you said again, because that's funny.
It is, again. Included in the bill is a provision that will require the IRS to outsource collection of certain tax debts to private collection agencies. We're going to have an in-depth list to be posted on IRSMedic.com. It's just too much to go through right now. But there's going to be some that they're going to let outside agencies collect. Now, any funds collected by these private collection agencies will not be paid into the coffers of the federal government, at least not immediately. Instead, they go into a special fund. Out of this fund, the private debt collection agencies are able to be paid up to 25% of what they collect based on their contracts with the IRS, and another 25% is to be used by the IRS to hire new revenue officers for local collection efforts and to hire new collections personnel for the automated collection system because we know they're grossly understaffed.
And if I could make a bold prediction, okay, because I guess this is how they're going to get their new employees. There won't be any new revenue officers. There won't be new ACS staff. Because, again, they've done this before. Mm-hmm. They've done the third-party collections before, and I had to endure the last round, which was just a complete waste of time. What is missing in this is that a private debt collection. Okay, so first of all, that you're talking about an income tax where there's certain due process rights that attach because the Supreme Court demands so. Okay, it's not like collecting anything else. The government, all right, for as horrible as the IRS is, okay, they have gone to create systems that try to protect certain rights. And probably the best you can expect from such a large organization. And I mean that as a compliment, because when you look at certain state agencies, you see they're missing the steps and the administration to do things fairly. They kind of are more arbitrary. Lots of states are all over the place on what they'll do. Mm-hmm. The IRS is pretty predictable. If someone comes in with something, I'm like, all right, I know that this is a deal we're going to be able to get this deal through. If someone comes in with a state problem, I'm like, well, we might, or we might not, right. Because somebody's feelings were hurt that morning. So that's sort of the thing you need to understand. The IRS does have some good qualities to it in the way it handles its collection cases. There's a predictability, mm-hmm. and that is the best thing I could say about it, which is a really good thing. Mm-hmm. It's predictable, and its mistakes it makes are predictable too. You know what they're going to do wrong,
right?
And with the IRS, there's networks of we belong to the American Society of Tax Problem Solvers, not the greatest of name, but a great group. Mm-hmm. I mean, really a great group. And so we meet with those people, and there's some fantastic tax attorneys on there. I got to get to one. I haven't been to one since Baltimore. Mm-hmm. And there's a guy, LG Brooks. I just want to give a shout out to him. Mm-hmm. He's an enrolled agent. He's just awesome. Yeah. He's just awesome. And any tax professionals listening, you'll just enjoy him. He is completely entertaining and inspiring. Yeah.
And for you to say so.
He's just a great guy. I really like him. And so that's so the IRS is sort of predictable. Now you're going to third-party collections.
Yes.
Okay. So here's the thing. They're not going to have everything set up and the years of feedback that the IRS has. And, now tax professionals are going to be talking about, like, hey, have you dealt with this people before? Hey, what do they do? What are they doing? They're not going to have it. And I could imagine myself, if I was running a business like that of, okay, I'm a third-party collection. Okay, what do I need to get in place to try to get to comply with the law? Because you have to comply with the law and you have to collect. Mm-hmm. And the amount of time it takes you to train that staff to be able to do that right.
I can't even imagine.
You already have the agency that can do that. That you already have all the structure in place that you can build up. Mm-hmm. You put the people there.
Right.
You grow that. They're not going to be. They don't have like a secret sauce.
No, and this doesn't sound like a simple process. What happens if your tax debt is sent to one of these private collection agencies? Okay, so first, the agency is going to send you a letter. If the address the IRS gave to contact you is incorrect, they're going to have to search for your correct address. So that's step number one where they could sort of screw up. Then it's going to call you to request full payment of your tax liability.
Does that sound familiar?
It does.
Right.
The IRS will never call you, Anthony.
Right.
We're never going to call you.
Who does call you?
The third-party collection agency.
And also people who are pretending to be the IRS in full payment. This has been the biggest scam for the last 2.5 years. People have been paying millions of dollars to people posing as the IRS, saying, you owe us, you better send us this by, credit card or wire, however they're doing it. So now, I mean, really.
The IRS literally, like once a month, puts out a press release. Hey, remember, never going to call you.
Never going to call you.
Never going to call you.
And the thing is they do call you because when back when the last time, which was just so ridiculous. There's a handful of cases that eventually made out because these companies are going to have to spend a year to train their people, and they're going to have a handful of cases because you're taking a regular collections person, and now you're going to try to train them on the taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, here's my question. It says if you cannot full pay your tax liability right away, they're authorized to allow you to reach an agreement to fully pay off your tax liability within 5 years. If you're unable, then we'll request from you all your detailed financial information and give that information to the IRS. So now you're able to negotiate with this third party? Are they going to have really specific rules on what to accept?
Basically, they're just a middleman. It looks like, when I read that, it looks like there's just going to be a middleman between the IRS and create a layer of a layer where your sensitive information can be breached and shared with everybody.
Yep.
It's just fantastically stupid. It's not going to it's not going to raise the revenue. You're throwing people to waste their time. Mm-hmm. There's no real way to do it. That's the way it was before. And I got the call. I had a client who, was a regular case. She owed about $70,000 or something like that. And I got a call. It was patched to me like, we have so-and-so calling on behalf of this client from so-and-so. I'm like, sounds like a scam call. But I'm thinking like, wait a second. That's right. They're doing that whole thing. And so I picked up the phone, and they're like, we're calling we're calling this. I'm like, okay, all right, I'm authorized, and you have my power of attorney. Oh yeah, we have it. Okay. Mm-hmm. And they're like, could you verify the taxpayer's social security number? I'm like, how about this? Why don't you verify it to me? Mm-hmm. Because that's what they're doing. And I was having around. I'm like, I don't know who you are. Sir, we're authorized by the IRS to collect this debt, and this information is confidential. I didn't call you. You called me. I need you.
Right.
Why don't you tell me? And so, okay, well, I'll send you out a letter so that you know what number to call us. But still, and the number, the information added up.
Yep.
But my suspicions as a practitioner, and basically they were useless anyway. They're like, we're gonna submit an offer. What do you want?
Yeah.
You're not the one who decides it. So thanks for the call. Thanks for nothing. You're wasting time. You're just creating a layer of nonsense.
Right.
And so really, that's what it is. Hey, could you confirm your information with us?
Well, it all sounds scary, but we want to talk about some things that aren't so scary.
Claudine, how would you explain the IRS to an enemy?
I would say the IRS is about truth and justice and fairness.
Now, how would you explain the IRS to a friend?
In that case, I would say the IRS is like calm waters with sharks swimming right below the surface.
Can you see the sharks?
You might.
Can you feel the sharks?
They do tend to bite.
Now, let's say you wanted to go into the water. Could you safely go into the water with the sharks in the water as well?
You could safely do it with a shark cage, say.
Now, could IRSMedic be your IRS shark cage?
It's what we do best.
IRSMedic, the law offices of Parent, and Wynn, LLP, real tax attorneys for tough tax problems.
As we talk about possible passport revocation from the IRS, we've been talking so far about it's terrible and stupid, honestly. But we don't. Our intention all along has not been to scare people. Our intention is to inform. And you've mentioned before you've had people call you literally suicidal because they owe taxes, and then to be in a foreign country potentially, stuck without a passport. That's scary. These people are frightened. So, we don't want to add to that. What I think we say here a lot, and it's true in this case, is we can make any situation better.
Yeah.
We really can.
And we're not the only ones.
Oh, right.
We're not the only ones. There's a lot of, there's a lot of good people out there.
There's hope.
Who care. There's a lot of good people who really do care about that someone gets their life back, and they can really see it from their perspective that they're not, and people have, I've learned a lot from the thousands of people I've talked to over the years. First of all, they all think I'm making it up, or I'm like, no, you're not the only person who thought of killing themselves. Mm-hmm. Like, really? I'm like,
didn't you literally have one a couple weeks ago?
Yep.
Yeah.
It happens, and it happens all the time. It really does, and it's like, no, you're not alone. I understand. They think that when they're going to call us, that they're going to get someone who's going to say, "Why don't you just pay your taxes?"
Yeah. Why don't you just pay them?
And honestly, there are some firms that are like that a little bit. I'm like, wow, way to go. What's
good
your
marketing.
So tell me your business plan here, right?
We're doing it all wrong.
Right. I'm like, wow. So you make them feel like crap. So then they'll give you money. Okay. I guess which can work.
Yeah, what you said too that really struck me was you don't want people to make choices out of desperation. You don't want someone to be so scared they're going to hire the postcard or the save pennies on the dollar postcard.
Yeah.
Because that can backfire as well.
Absolutely. These firms out there and people sometimes balk at our fee. I'm like, okay, well, all right, you have options, well, this person will do it for $3,500. I'm like, okay, well, I could save you $3,000 because you can go online and you can find someone for $495. Right now, you can go search it. They'll say $495 tax resolution. Why don't you hire them? Well, because that seems a little too cheap. Oh, okay. So now so you kind of know there is some level that's not plausible. And the issue is when you're trying to, it's incredibly easy to throw something at the IRS. It's so incredibly easy to make it look like you're doing a lot of work too, because taxpayers have no idea how all of this works. They don't know what somebody's really doing. So they could say, yeah, we're going to do all this. We're going to do all this. And actually many times it's the client who's filling out the form and they're just like slapping it together. They're only delaying it. They're not doing anything at all that the client could not have done on their own. And when you're just slapping together a financial statement to say, okay, IRS, just here, take it. And if it's nonsense, they'll just reject it. Okay, now you're back to square one. And then they'll say, hey, give us more money because they're looking for more money. Or it's an amount that you really can't afford to pay. But you're so scared. And this is what's really alarming me about this is that you are completely freaking people out. And you know what? This agitation will work by the IRS to get people to get into repayment agreements that they can't quite afford, that they can't quite make, or reach into things that they shouldn't do. That they'll say, they'll go to their parents and say, I need this, I'll lose my passport, lose my job. And the parents are like, okay, we don't have a choice. Well, the IRS will never look at your parents' ability to pay. I won't say never, but I would say probably never. Okay. They don't look at other people, people you're going to borrow money for as an ability to pay. So you can probably get a deal if you don't have the ability to pay 4 pennies on the dollar, and not go and exhaust the resources of people who want to help you.
Exactly.
Because what if you need it for something else? Like, well, things happen in life, and people reach. And I've seen this before. I've seen somebody who really couldn't afford it give $200,000 to a son-in-law to pay off a payroll tax bill. And that affected his retirement substantially. And the thing is, it's like, well, if you gave a little bit of that money to me, I would have been able to settle it for very little and you'd still have your retirement.
Right.
And so that's the thing. It's like parents are going to like, oh, I got to help my kid out. I got to help him. He got in this trouble. Don't or help them or help them, but help them make the right decision and negotiate it on your own. You don't pay that bill.
Right.
Okay. And the IRS isn't looking for you. I mean, they're happy to take it. They're not going to send it back to you to say, hey, I made a mistake. I should have, my son should have filed an offer in compromise with you instead of me full paying it. And now I'm I need that money now. Can you give it back to me? They're not going to.
Yeah, and what people I think surprises people is offers and compromise do work.
Oh, yeah.
You can compromise. We've had several articles and blogs and podcasts about negotiating with the IRS. It's possible.
Right. Our success rate is like close to 100%. We had 2 last year. I think 1 this year that didn't go through. They were both reaches, and one was for effective tax administration, which is always sort of a question mark because it doesn't really go on your ability to pay. We're trying to say and those are a little riskier. And overall, the passage rate is 40%, which is kind of surprisingly high because I think it's 40% because a lot of people who are doing it on their own are giving the IRS too much.
Yes.
Okay. And then, but then it's offset by these offer and compromise mills that are just slapping it together. And then people who are lowballing. But there's a lot of good, there's a lot of good people out there who can do an offer and compromise for you. And by no stretch of the imagination are we the only game in hell. There's a lot of great people. I learned a lot of great things, a lot of great tricks from our network of people. And people really do care about solving it. And
if you do if you go into an offer and compromise or you negotiate with the IRS, you want to make sure that the payment plan is realistic and sustainable. Because if you default on that, they can then take your passport, right?
Right. When you default on it, this is what happens when people are in an agreement that is too much. That fear of the IRS. And, a lot of times, this is what it'll be. Someone's like, oh my God, the IRS is there. And it could be a revenue officer, or they could reach this conclusion on your own, like, well, I could pay the $10,000, perhaps more, to a tax attorney. Mm-hmm. And then the revenue officer, well, you're just going to be paying that money to us. So, why don't you just pay that money to us instead of hiring a tax attorney? Or the person has that thought on their own. It's like, well, no, that's a really bad idea because that revenue officer doesn't have your best interests at heart. And even if you wasted your money on a tax attorney mm-hmm. and you actually end up paying the IRS the rest of it, your life is great. I mean, you're doing great. Mm-hmm. The chances of that happening, that's a good problem. Mm-hmm. That's like a problem to say, hey, I went to the oncologist, I gave him all this money, and he said, you know what? That wasn't cancer. I swallowed a penny, and I took a laxative, and now I'm all better.
Fine.
That's really what that's like to say, I gave all that money to that tax attorney, went over with it, found this hidden source of money, and I was able to pay my tax in full. Mm-hmm. It's really the same thing. The chances of that happening are remote. Of course it can happen, and it does happen. Most people are usually thrilled to say, oh,
okay,
cool, I'm getting rid of the IRS problem. Hey, nice
thanks.
to meet you. All right, great.
Now, if you do default, another issue with that is you're going to then go back to the IRS a second time and go, hey guys, do you think we could try a different offer? And they're probably not going to be as willing to work with you.
You're gonna have an uphill battle.
Yeah.
You're saying, hey, you defaulted an offer before, and if you're assigned for field collections to a revenue officer, which is if you're overseas, there's international revenue officers, and there was a recent report by TIGTA about how they needed to pick it up a little bit. They weren't doing a good enough job. If you're out for field collections, that revenue officer say, okay, hey, look, you're really, you're a bad guy. You're a seriously delinquent taxpayer. And there's going to be, and there's those IRS employees who are like that. Mm-hmm. Why don't you pay your taxes?
Is there going to be some sort of scarlet letter we're going to have to wear?
Exactly. I mean, that's what it is. Like,
D
you
for
got
delinquent.
but they don't give you a letter when you pay your taxes. They don't even give you a thank you when you pay your taxes. Well, what about all the years that they paid taxes? Can you at least say, hey, this guy is a seriously delinquent taxpayer. All right, let's just take a look at their whole life, though. Mm-hmm. Okay, so maybe you're up on things a little bit, IRS. Maybe to say, oh, someone who's just a little bit behind these past few years, but on the overall has been contributing so much to our national treasury. Right? Well, why don't they say that? No, you haven't paid us this last few years.
There's no
all
gold
those
stars.
other years they forget about.
Yep.
No, right.
That's it. So I think we can, really confidently say, as screwy as this potential law we think probably will pass today.
Probably, yeah. And I think that I don't know if the president actually signs things or if there's a stamp.
I would imagine getting your hands on that stamp.
Right.
That'd be awesome. $1 million.
Yeah. And so, I mean, if this is not passed, we'll remove this podcast.
Yes.
But it looks like a done deal, and we really wanted to get this out there because we know there's a lot of people who are going to be putting a lot of nonsense out there, and a lot of nonsense is going to come from all over the place. But I think what people need to know is that, yes, it's serious, but every problem can be worked out. You need to know everything, though, and you have to take it seriously.
Mm-hmm. And what we're going to do is continue to update IRSMedic.com with anything we find out. As things become clear, anything new that's implemented, we're going to be updating. We're going to have a blog published shortly with all the details we talked about today and some additional details as well. And thanks to the IRSMedic team for all their input. This was truly a team effort to get everything ready and going for today. So make sure you check out IRSMedic.com, and thanks for listening to Parental Advisory. Thanks for joining Parental Advisory, hosted by Anthony Parent, produced by Claudine Gindel, that's me, engineered by Chris Chen. For more podcasts, visit our website at parentaladvisoryshow.com and like us on Facebook to submit story ideas. We'd like to thank our sponsors, IRSMedic.com, the law offices of Parent, and Wynn, LLP, real tax attorneys for tough tax problems.